Hello students, my name is Dr. Taki Skordis, and this presentation is going to speak directly to your assignment 2 for ENG1501, which of course focuses on the short story. At the end of this presentation, you should hopefully feel a little bit more confident about what is expected from you, but before we get into the specifics of the assignment, I think it's a good idea to reflect on assignment 1 briefly. So as you begin working on assignment 2, I think it's essential to take a moment to reflect on assignment 1, not just the grade you received, but the feedback that came with it. Feedback is one of the most valuable tools in improving your academic writing and learning how to meet expectations more effectively. So you want to start by revisiting your assignment 1 feedback. So review the comments and marks you received. Identify specific areas where you lost marks or where your marker has provided some suggestions for improvement. This could be the structure of your answer. Perhaps you were struggling to understand the questions. Maybe you just didn't quote enough. So understanding where you went wrong is a first step towards doing better next time. Make notes on recurring issues so that you can avoid them going forward. You also want to make sure that you access your e-reserves. You need to go log into the library, find the e-reserves link, enter the module code, and then search for the right text. If you're not sure how to do this, there is a document posted under additional resources that details this in depth. So please make sure you go through this if you're still unsure or you have not yet accessed your e-reserves. Now, if you encountered any Turnitin errors during your previous submissions, such as similarity reports not generating or specific errors showing like report unavailable, it's important to try and resolve these early. These issues are usually simple to fix and sometimes can be corrected just by simply accepting the EULA, if that was an error that you received, and the EULA is, of course, your end user license agreement in Turnitin. So understanding how to interpret your Turnitin similarity report is also part of academic growth. High similarity scores can indicate poor paraphrasing, insufficient referencing, so use the feedback to adjust how you integrate and credit sources in your writing. Now, before you begin with assignment 2, you want to make sure that you revise Unit 3 in Tutorial Letter 501. And this unit is going to contain key content, concepts, and writing frameworks relevant to the assignment. So reviewing it will refresh your understanding and give you a stronger foundation to build from. One of the most common reasons students underperform on assignments is, of course, a lack of time. So don't leave the writing process until the last minute. Give yourself time to plan, draft, revise, and proofread. The quality of your work is almost always improved when you step away from it and return with fresh eyes. So you can create a schedule for yourself, even a loose one, and you can break this task up into manageable stages. So you can say stage 1 is reading, stage 2 is outlining, stage 3 is going to be my writing, and stage 4 is going to be editing. And then, of course, you can set internal deadlines for each of these. Finally, you want to ensure that you submit before the deadline. Submitting early also gives you time to handle any unexpected technical issues, such as file formatting errors, uploading problems, or Turnitin delays. So these are all very simple things that you can do that can potentially help improve your marks for assignment 2. Okay, so what are the differences between a short story and a novel? So while both short stories and novels are forms of narrative fiction, they're going to differ in several important ways, not just in length, but in structure, scope, and intention. Now, understanding these differences is essential when reading, analyzing, or even writing in either form. The most obvious difference is length. A short story is typically designed to be read in one sitting, and this limited length influences every other element of the story, from the number of characters involved to the complexity of the plot. A novel, by contrast, is a much longer form. It allows the writer to develop multiple plot lines, explore subplots, and delve more deeply into character development and setting. Short stories also generally take place in a single location and over a short period of time. The setting is going to be tight and focused, and this is going to help maintain the intensity and unity of the narrative. Now, because of this, the short story often feels like a zoomed-in snapshot, a single incident or experience observed very closely. In novels, the setting is often broader and more dynamic. Characters may travel to different places, and the timeline might span months, years, or even generations. And this is going to allow for more elaborate world building and more complex cause and effect relationships between the events. Short stories also tend to feature a limited number of characters, often focusing on just one or two central figures. With limited space, every detail counts. Each action, word, or thought must reveal something significant. These characters may not go through major changes, but they often offer deep insight into a particular moment, emotion, or conflict. Novels, however, offer room for more expansive character development. Multiple characters can have distinct arcs, relationships can evolve, and characters are more likely to change significantly over time. In novels, readers often witness a character's long-term growth, failures, or transformations. Now, a short story typically zooms in on one main incident or conflict. There's usually a single plot line with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Because of this, the short story often relies on suggestion and implication. Not everything is explained. Much is going to be left to your interpretation. In contrast, a novel may involve multiple interwoven plot lines, subplots, and layers of conflict. The structure is more flexible, and there is more time for the plot to develop gradually and build toward multiple climaxes or turning points. Now, both forms are going to explore themes, but they tend to do so in different ways. A short story often focuses on one theme or idea, something that can be fully explored within a brief narrative. Now, this theme may emerge gradually, sometimes only fully felt after the story ends. Novels, with their greater length, can explore a range of themes in depth. They often present multiple perspectives on an issue, raising complex questions about society, identity, morality, or the human condition. Now, importantly, the message in both forms is not about teaching a moral. Instead, it's about presenting a perspective or insight that might challenge readers to think differently. In short stories, this insight is usually developed through a single concentrated experience, and in novels, it may emerge through the effect of many moments and voices. So while short stories and novels share the same fundamental building blocks, which is character, setting, plot, and theme, they're going to use them very differently. The short story is about focus, intensity, and implication, while the novel is about depth and breadth. When we study a short story, a novel, or any narrative text, it's not enough to just follow what happens. We need to understand how and why the story is crafted the way it is. So literature is always layered and intentional. And in order to unpack its meaning, we need to look closely at 5 essential elements. These are setting, characterization, plot, narration, and theme. Now, these elements are not separate, but they're interconnected, and they shape how we experience and interpret a story. Each of these aspects is going to tell us something crucial. The setting shows us the world the story lives in. Characterization reveals who lives in that world and why they matter. Plot is going to explore what happens in the story. Narration controls how the story is told and how we connect with it. And finally, the theme invites us to reflect on bigger questions about things like life and society. Now, as you engage with these elements, remember your goal is not just to identify them, but to analyze their function, to ask what each element helps you feel, question, or understand. So with that in mind, let's break down each element in more detail. First, we have setting, and the setting refers not only to the physical location of the story, but also to the time period, cultural context, and social environment. A good setting is not simply decorative, it actively shapes the plot, the characters, and the themes. In literary analysis, you need to move beyond just naming a town, stating the era, and you need to ask why the story happens there and then. For example, a story set during apartheid doesn't just unfold in that era. It is influenced and framed by issues such as injustice and racial tension. Now, settings can often serve symbolic purposes as well. So, for example, a storm could reflect the inner turmoil of a character. So you also need to think about symbolism a setting is trying to convey. Now, when you study setting, you can also ask yourself, how does the time period influence the character's beliefs and behavior? Does the setting create tension or provide comfort? What political, historical, or cultural undercurrents are present in the setting? And how would the story change if it was set in a different time or place? The next element we have is characterization. Now, this is the craft of developing characters into believable, multidimensional figures. And authors are going to use a range of techniques to do this. They're going to use direct description, dialogue, internal thoughts, actions, and even how other characters respond to them. So strong characterization is going to make readers invest emotionally in a story, but you also need to think about the characters structurally. So in other words, what purpose does the character serve? Are they a vehicle for a larger theme? Do they represent a social group, an idea, historical identity? Characterization also involves how characters change over time. So with this in mind, you could ask what internal, external conflicts drive their growth or their downfall. What motivates this character? What do they desire or fear? How do their words and actions match or contradict one another? Next up is plot. And plot is not just a sequence of events, it's the relationship between these events. So a compelling plot has a logical structure, typically following a familiar arc. You'll have the exposition, the rising action, the climax, falling action, and finally the resolution. But deeper analysis asks how these stages reflect the story's emotional, thematic, and symbolic trajectory. Events should not be seen as isolated. They're connected by cause and consequence. So each action reveals something new about the characters, or intensifies the conflict, and moves the theme forward. Flashbacks and foreshadowing or non-linear timelines are going to complicate how readers engage with the plot. Now, when you're considering the plot of a story, ask yourself, what event is going to initiate the central conflict? How do the characters' choices influence the direction of the plot? What moment is a true turning point? And how does the plot structure reflect deeper ideas such as power, trauma, or even transformation? Next, we have narration. And narration defines the voice of the story and controls how information is delivered. Now, stories use different types of narration. You have first-person narration. This is usually defined by the use of I or we, and it's going to offer intimacy and unlimited perspective. Next, we have second-person narration. This is usually seen when an author uses the word you. It's going to be rare, but this type of narration creates immediacy. And then finally, we have third-person narration, which can either focus on one character's experience or it knows all perspectives. It's important to keep in mind that no narrator is going to ever be truly objective. Narrators make choices about what to include, what to hide, and how to frame events emotionally. So, for example, a child narrator may miss complex adult motivations, making readers do more interpretive work, whereas a biased narrator may contradict reality and create tension and doubt. So when you study narration, you need to ask yourself, who is telling the story and what is their stake in the events? How much do they know and what do they choose to reveal? Can we trust them? And how does the narration shape our emotional response to the story? Lastly, we have theme, and the theme is the central question insight a story explores. It's not a one-word topic like love or loss, but a more nuanced exploration of an issue. Themes are not always obvious and are rarely stated outright. Instead, they emerge through a careful combination of plot developments, character journeys, setting, tone, and even symbolism. So a single story might explore multiple themes which may overlap or conflict with each other. When you study theme, ask yourself what insight about life, society, or human behavior does the story offer? How do character decisions and outcomes reinforce a central idea? Are there symbols, motifs that support the theme? And why might this theme matter to readers? Each of these elements, setting, characterization, plot, narration, and theme, all work together to create layers of meaning. Understanding and questioning them will help you move beyond just surface level summaries and will allow you to engage in richer, more original literary analysis. So always let your questions guide your insights. That's how academic reading becomes critical thinking. Okay, so let's move on to the actual assignment. And section A of your assignment is going to be an important space for reflection and personal engagement. So unlike other parts of your coursework that may focus more on textual analysis, you'll find this in section B. This section is going to invite you to think critically and personally about what you've learned in Unit 3 of Tutorial Letter 501. So the aim here is not to test your ability to memorize facts, but rather to understand how well you can apply, respond to, and reflect on the content presented in the unit. You'll notice that section A is supposed to be reflective. We're going to ask for your opinion, and the questions are asking for your own interpretation. That means your responses should draw on your own experiences and thoughts. We're not asking you to repeat what the study guide says necessarily. Instead, we want you to engage with the material. So it's important for you to try and ask yourself questions. What stood out to you? What changed the way you see short stories or narration? What ideas sparked your interest or challenged what you previously believed? Now you're going to be asked to respond to 3 questions, each of which should be answered in a short paragraph of around 100 to 200 words. This length allows you to go beyond just surface level comments and provide a thoughtful, developed response. But it still requires you to write with focus and purpose. So you need to think of each paragraph as a small, self-contained reflection that is clear, concise, and original. Now in this section, we're looking for honest, well-considered responses that reflect your own understanding and growth. We also want to see a clear demonstration that you've engaged with the unit meaningfully, even if that means questioning or critiquing it. We want to see connections between the theory in Tutorial Letter 501 and your own thinking, reading, or writing practices. We want to also see writing that is your own, not copied, paraphrased from the study guide, online sources, or other students. Even in a reflective section like this, your answers must be entirely your own words. Now, you can reference ideas from the study guide, of course, but they should serve as the foundation for your own reflections, not replace them. Now, you might wonder, why we're asking for your personal opinion in an academic setting, and the answer is quite simple. It's that reflection deepens learning. So being able to explain what you've learned and how it matters to you is one of the most effective ways to solidify your understanding. It also helps us see how you're processing the content, what you're getting, what you're still unsure about, and where your strengths lie. This section also prepares you for real-world thinking and communication, whether you're discussing literature, creating your own stories, or just navigating ideas in everyday life. Being able to articulate your point of view clearly and thoughtfully is a valuable skill. Now, as you prepare to write for Section A of your assignment, it's important to remember that this isn't just a test of memory or terminology. This is going to be space for authentic reflection. So to help you do that well, here are some practical tips along with why each one matters. So the first thing you want to do is you want to reread Unit 3 and jot down key points that felt relevant to you for each question. So before you start writing, take some time to go back through Unit 3. This is not just about scanning for answers, but really pausing to notice which parts stood out to you. Was there a definition, an idea, or an example that made you think differently? Make brief notes on those. That process is going to help you write specific and personal answers rather than just general statements. You also want to ask yourself before writing each paragraph, what did I think or feel when I read this? So you need to slow down and try and connect the material to your own thinking. If a story or a concept challenged you, excited you, or even confused you, say that and then explain why. These internal reactions are what we're actually looking for. You also want to try and avoid general answers like, I found this interesting, unless you explain why it was interesting. It's easy to fall into this habit of using safe, empty phrases, but saying something was interesting without backing it up doesn't actually tell us anything. Instead, we want you to think more deeply. What about it was surprising? Did it change how you think? Did it relate to something you've read before? Even simple explanations help give your writing more depth and clarity. You also don't want to try and guess what we want to hear. This is about what you think, not what you think you're supposed to say. So students sometimes write what they think the lecturer wants, and the result can sound forced or insincere. But this section is designed to value your voice. There's no perfect answer as such, and we're not looking for a certain opinion. We want to see how you're engaging with the material in a thoughtful way. So be honest, even if you're unsure or critical of an idea. Finally, you want to approach these questions like a memoir about your learning. You don't need big words or fancy arguments, just thoughtful, honest writing. Remember, you're telling a short story about your experience with Unit 3, what you noticed, what changed your thinking, what stuck with you. Keep your language natural and focused. Clarity is more powerful than complexity here. We're not grading you on how academic you sound. We're looking for authentic, engaged, and reflective thinking. Okay, so section B is based on the short story Man Lands on the Moon by Sindiwe Magona. Now, when responding to literary questions, especially in assignments involving short stories, it's going to be essential to structure your answers carefully. So these guidelines will hopefully help ensure your paragraphs are well formed, academically sound, and persuasive. So let's just briefly look at what each part of the guideline means and why it matters. So the first is a paragraph length of 10 to 15 lines. So this recommended length allows you to present a fully developed argument without becoming too wordy or vague. So think of your paragraph here as a mini essay. It should have a clear beginning, middle, and end. You want to also avoid overly short answers, which often lack depth, and overly long ones, which tend to lose focus. You also want to begin with a clear topic sentence. So your topic sentence is your anchor. It should state the main idea of the paragraph clearly and concisely. And you need to think of this as a sort of signpost that tells the reader what to expect. Now, this also sets the tone and direction of your argument. You also want to use quoted evidence from the short story. So to support your argument, you must include quotations from the short story. These quotes are your evidence. They show us that your argument is rooted in the text. However, don't just drop them in. Integrate them smoothly into your sentences so they contribute to your point clearly and grammatically. You also want to explain how the quote supports your argument. So don't assume the quote speaks for itself. Always follow it up with an explanation. Tell the reader exactly how this detail supports your point. This is the analysis, the heart of your paragraph. It shows critical thinking and your ability to interpret literature. You also want to use the correct referencing and academic conventions. So even in a short response, You should practice proper citation techniques. So make sure you're consistent. We always recommend using the Harvard referencing style. Additionally, maintain a formal academic tone, so you want to avoid slang, overly casual expressions. You also don't want to use first person unless we're specifically asking you for this. So in other words, these questions should be answered differently to section A. For section B, you need to be engaging with literature on an academic level. You also want to end with a reflective closing sentence. So wrap up your paragraph with a final sentence that summarizes what you've shown and reflect on its importance. This is your chance to connect the evidence and analysis back to the main topic, reinforcing the overall purpose of the paragraph. And then just a final reminder, every paragraph should function as a complete and coherent unit of thought. So following these steps will not only improve your writing, but also help you better understand and communicate your interpretation of literary texts. In this section, we are going to examine the 5 questions from section B of your assessment. Each question focuses on a different literary element. These questions are designed to test your understanding of how the story is constructed and how its parts work together to create meaning. So let's break down each question and explore how to approach it effectively. Question 1 states, man lands on the moon, sometimes uses first-person narration. How does first-person narration contribute to the story's meaning? Quote at least 2 instances where first-person narration has been used to support your argument. So this question is asking you to consider how the story's use of first-person narration influences the reader's experiences and understanding of the events. To answer this question well, you should first be clear on what first-person narration is. First-person narration is a storytelling method where the narrator is a character in the story using pronouns like I or we. Now, this perspective allows the reader direct access to the narrator's thoughts, feelings, and worldview, which can create a stronger emotional connection and a sense of intimacy. When preparing your response, you should identify where the narrator speaks from their own perspective and reflect on how this shapes your interpretation of the story. Does it make the events feel more personal or emotional? Perhaps it makes it feel more biased. Then you need to think about how the narrator's voice reveals deeper cultural or emotional struggles and how that contributes to the overall meaning of the story. Finally, you want to make sure to choose at least 2 strong examples from the text that clearly show first-person narration in use, and then explain how each one connects to the story's broader themes. Question 2 states, the central conflict in the story stems from the contrasting beliefs held by Makulu and her mother. Discuss this conflict and explain how it is resolved. Quote 3 instances from the text to support your answer. So here you are being asked to identify and explore the major disagreement in the story, specifically the generational clash between Makulu and her mother. So you want to start by thinking about what their beliefs represent. The conflict arises not just from a single event, but from a deeper contrast in how they see the world. Now, in approaching this question, you want to examine what causes their disagreement and how their relationship changes over the course of the story. You need to also consider whether the resolution involves compromise, understanding, or a shift in one of their viewpoints. When selecting your quotes, try to include examples that reflect both characters' perspectives, as well as a moment in the story that suggests how the conflict is addressed or softened. Your discussion should also show how this conflict contributes to the story's message about culture, family, or progress. Please also remember that you are asked to quote 3 instances from the story, so please make sure that you do this. Question 3 states, discuss how the setting of man lands on the moon impacts the events in the story. You will need to identify the setting first before explaining how it influences events in the story. Remember to quote from the text to support your answer. So this question focuses on the importance of setting, the time, place, and cultural environment where the story takes place. In this case, you'll want to think about how setting affects the characters' experiences and reactions, especially to the news of the moon landing. A good way to begin is by briefly defining what setting means and then describing the specific elements of the story setting, such as its isolation, traditions, communication limitations. You also want to think about how these factors shape characters' responses, beliefs, and daily lives. Now, the setting can deeply influence how believable or meaningful something like a moon landing might seem. So you want to look for quotes that describe the physical environment, community attitudes, or traditional beliefs. And then you want to explain how these elements of the setting contribute to the tone and development of the story. Now, your goal here is to show that setting is not just a backdrop, but an active part of how the story unfolds. Okay, let's move on to question 4. And question 4 states, explain the significance of the title in relation to the short story. In your discussion, explain why you think the author chose the title, then provide a title that you think could be used as an alternative. So this question asks you to think critically about the title, Man Lands on the Moon, and what it means within the context of the story, not just as a literal event, but as a symbol or theme. So you want to begin by reflecting on why the author might have chosen this particular title. Does it highlight a clash between traditional and modern customs? Does it perhaps represent a moment of disbelief or confusion? So your answer should explore what the moon landing symbolizes for the characters and for the community in the story. Then you are asked to suggest an alternative title. Now, this is your chance to be creative, but your suggestion must still capture the essence of the story and its themes. So be sure to include a short explanation of why your chosen title fits, and when preparing your response, focus on the deeper meanings behind the original title and think about how it connects to character experiences, cultural shifts, or the overall mood of the story. Question 5 states, in your study guide, you are introduced to a characterization table on pages 46 to 47. Using any 3 prompts from that table, discuss the characterization of one character from the short story. Your answer must include the prompt question, a response to the prompts, as well as evidence from the short story to support it. Now, this question is all about character analysis. You'll need to choose one character from the story and then select 3 prompt questions from the characterization table to guide your discussion. Each prompt will help you look at a different aspect of the character, such as their thoughts, their actions, their relationships, and even their language. For each prompt, you should write a thoughtful response that explains what it reveals about the character's personality, their motivations, or growth throughout the story. You also want to make sure that you include direct evidence from the text to back up your points. So think carefully about the examples you choose. Try to avoid repeating anything from the study guide and instead find fresh, original details from the story. Your final goal is to build a full picture of the character and explain why they are important to the story's message or emotional impact. Okay, and then finally, just a reminder that you must not use any examples or evidence that has already been given in the study guide. If you do, you're going to lose marks, so please spend some time and think of some original examples from the story. I also want to stress one final point here, students, and that is to please not copy your answers from any source. We know it's really tempting to simply use AI or go online to find answers, but as some of you may have already seen from assignment 1, our markers are finding plagiarism. So keep in mind that it's better to receive 40 or 50%, but know you have written original answers and received feedback on how to improve, rather than simply receiving 0 with no feedback because of plagiarism. So please, students, just keep this in mind. Assignments are there so you can learn from your mistakes, so be honest. The goal here is progress, not perfection. Okay, so let's go over a couple of tips for Section B. So before you begin answering Section B, it's of course going to be important that you read through Unit 3 as well as the short story very carefully. Now remember to access the short story from the e-reserves and make sure that you give yourself enough time to read and understand the story. Now, you may need to read the story multiple times, so plan ahead for this. If you're still unsure how to access the e-reserves, I'll remind you once more that under additional resources, there's a document posted there that outlines exactly what you need to do. Now, if this fails or you're having some technical trouble, please don't wait until the last minute. Make sure you contact us at ENG1501 tunisa.ac.za. Now, the questions in this section are directly based on the ideas and content presented in Unit 3 and the short story, so engaging with the material thoroughly is going to be essential. Missing key concepts or failing to understand the story will obviously affect your marks. Each question in this section must be answered in a paragraph format. That means writing a structured response that clearly addresses the question, provides an explanation or example, and includes any relevant quotation, whether from the guide or most likely the story itself. Now, your paragraphs should be focused and well developed, and you should avoid simply listing ideas. Instead, link them together in a clear and logical way. Now remember that quotations are not optional in this task. Where you are asked to provide a quotation, you must do so. If you leave it out, 1 mark will be deducted. It's also essential to reference your quotations correctly. If you are unsure how to quote correctly, you can consult pages 56 through 59 in Tutorial Letter 501, which will not only show you how to write about short stories, but it will give you some examples of how to quote from a short story. So a good response will clearly connect the content of Tutorial Letter 501 to your own understanding of the short story. Now, as you write your responses, remember that clarity, relevance, and evidence are all essential. Don't overlook the importance of accurate referencing, and don't forget to proofread your work. Thoughtful, well-referenced paragraph for each question will give you the best chance of success. All right, and that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you, dear students, for taking the time to listen to today's presentation. I sincerely hope you found the content helpful and that it gave you a clearer understanding of the topic. Your attention and participation, as always, are greatly appreciated. Best of luck with assignment 2. We're all confident you're going to do well.